Oh, welcome. My name, Felix Amiri. Some of you know me. We've either met or discussed at some point or had some conversations on LinkedIn. I'm technical director of AFIS and also a faculty member at the Institute of Food Processing Technology at Conestoga College, Cambridge, Ontario. And I'm a strong SSQA advocate. We can discuss that at some other point if you're interested in the SSQA concept. I am really looking forward to that taking hold in the industry, a wider scope of implementation. This topic, gap assessment, I, I don't know how much you've worked with this type of consideration in the food industry or the activity around gap assessment in food companies. It leaves a lot of questions in my mind. What are the gaps and so forth? So these are part of the conversation today. Um, uh, and so the questions, the comments, the insights relating to gap assessment, but the topic, of course, it's a question. Why does the Global Food Safety and Quality Assurance Report Card give little cause for celebrations? Because I don't know what your experience has been, but looking in the news media and their notices and announcements from government bodies and agencies, um, I don't see much cause for celebrations. But we do gap assessment. So this time it's the gap assessment discussion. It's not about the gaps that companies have with respect to some standards against which they've been audited. This is now looking at what really the question, what are the gaps? Why do we have so many problems, so many issues with food safety, in spite of all of the activities that are going on in the industry? Conferences, training, and training sessions, webinars, discussions like this, other forums of discussions, exchange of information, all of that happening, but we still have a gap. Why is the question that we're trying to discuss today. A suggested gap assessment cycle under the SSQA or using this SSQA principles. I think that a lot of the audit standards that assess gaps may not follow this cycle as such because they have the audit sets of requirements and they check companies against the gaps that exist between what the companies do and what the requirements expect. That leaves me with a question as what if the gaps exist with the sets of requirements? What if the companies that are being assessed do the right things, but the requirements that are being used to assess them have gaps that do not reflect what the companies do correctly, which means that the gaps are not ascribed only to the companies, but could also be ascribed to the standard against which they are assessed, which is fair. But this system here actually is more of a practical cycle. We need to establish what needs to happen, which is the goal setting phase. And then between what needs to happen and what needs to be done, there could be gaps. And from what needs to be done to what is actually done, which is the bottom part of the cycle here, there could be gaps. So at every point, there could be gaps around this cycle. From what is done to what happens, there could be gap because of what is done may not be producing what, or what is done produces what happens, but what happens may not align with what needs to happen, and there could be gaps there. So there are several points where there could be gaps. So the question there is, where are the gaps? Really, gaps could exist everywhere according to this cycle, and that is the driver of where to pay attention, where to assess, and actually determine what gaps exist so that they could be eliminated. Within this cycle, the part here, from what happens to what needs to happen, that is a critical area And it's the area that have described as the efficacy confirmation point. Because what needs to happen and what happens if they don't match, then efficacy is brought to question. It is questionable whether the results that are desired or needed are achieved. And the word here needs highlighted is important because sometimes we may want certain things to happen, but they may not be the right things. So in order to do the right things and expect the right things to happen at this point, the goal setting has to be correct according to what is actually needed, as opposed to just desires, personal desires or group desires. So this is where I also use another term, the desirable things that are desirable that need to happen should be what the goals identify, so that what needs to happen actually happens. And so this is the cycle, a gap assessment cycle according to the SSQA concept. And there are other points I want to share regarding this. The typical gaps, as I have observed, and maybe some of you have observed the same things, the typical gaps are lack of commitment and consistency and integrity in companies. And this is not just talking about management commitment, as is usually the phrase that's used in the industry, but this is talking about the general commitment from operations management to board members to the board of directors to investors even. Commitment, the consistency, and integrity are very important. If there are any lacks there, then if there are any gaps rather, then you can expect the company not to succeed as well, or for the right things to happen that are needed to happen. If there's lack of commitment, consistency, and integrity, and sometimes companies pursue incorrect and superficial goals. The goals are set without thorough examination of whether they are desirable goals, that is, what needs to happen, as opposed to what we want to happen. So it's possible for goals to be incorrectly set, and therefore you can pursue those goals not achieving desirable goals or not meeting what needs to happen. And so that's an area of gap that could exist in our organization. Failure to seek the right expertise, the right collaboration and cooperation of relevant partners is another area where gaps typically exist. And companies need to understand from what they desire, what is desirable for them to do, understand or know what expertise they need, and seek those expertise and collaboration, cooperation to achieve what needs to happen. Measuring success against incorrect or superficial goals, which starts from the goal setting stage. If the goals are not set correctly, well, of course, you're going to be meeting them, but they will be incorrect goals, and therefore there are bound to be some gaps as to what needs to happen and what happens in reality. Failure to identify and eliminate root causes. And this is something that I have observed. A lot of companies do this from a compliance perspective. Causes, they do it to comply, but they don't do root causes. They don't dig down to see what has caused problems to eliminate them. And that's an area of gap that exists, I have observed in the industry. Ineffective preventive action, of course, that comes from number 5. If you don't identify the actual root cause, you cannot implement good and effective preventive action, and that becomes critical. And this shows up in terms of the results that the industry is getting. We're celebrating a lot of things, but then the actual results from the notices that we get from agencies show that there have been some failings even where celebrations had occurred about certain accomplishments. And this is where the question of this discussion really plays out. The actions that are taken to prevent issues, if they were effective, why? So of course, we know they're not effective. That's why we're getting those instances of situations. Absence of efficacy confirmation. This is the measurement thing. We do a lot of things in the industry. We don't stop to check if we're achieving the desirable results, not the results that we desire to see, but the desirable results that benefit more than us, that benefit the stakeholders. Are we getting those results? This is the checkpoint where we need to reaffirm that, whether it's about a program, a proposal, a software, anything that we're doing, we need to stop and check and confirm the efficacy that it is producing the desired results. Now, I do differentiate efficacy from effectiveness. Efficacy is the capacity, the power to produce the results, and effectiveness is the actual results produced. They're effective. And so the efficacy and the effectiveness are differentiated in that form, in my mind anyway. So that's another point that could be discussed. But I prefer efficacy because if something can produce the desired result, something has the power to produce the desired results. If you're not getting those results, there must be gaps somewhere in your setup or management system, and you need to address those gaps and reconfirm whether the program or procedures you're doing actually are delivering the results. And that's where there's the interplay between effectiveness and efficacy. So those are some of the points. I have a list of recommendations for regulatory agencies as well as industry managers that I'll quickly run through. One of them is maintain a realistic commitment, consistency, and integrity. That is necessary. Second, set the correct goals. And I'm using the example according to the goal-setting principles of safety, security, quality assurance. And if a government agency person or policymaker were to ask me what are the SSQA goal-setting principles, I'm hoping that some of them would ask. I can go through that conversation with them to see whether their regulatory agencies' goals or their government goals are actually the correct goals, and then they can review those. So that's another. Identify important external success partners. So don't work alone. Don't be a lone ranger. As a manager of a company, seek partners who can help you succeed. It's part of it. And the same thing with government agencies. Seek partners. They could be industry partners or other governments that could help them succeed. Seek expert advice consultation from persons, organization, parties. No limits to the sources of advice that you could seek as a manager. And this is where SSQA brings the idea of participatory alliance. You got to form those alliances in order to seek the expertise that you could get from those interactions. Maintain practical collaborative alliances linked to number 4 there. So we'll go on to 6. Actively track and confirm the efficacy. So there has to be measurement. Whatever form or design you follow to measure and confirm the efficacy, the effectiveness, and efficiency, not wasting resources type of approach that leads into food security kind of considerations for us. All of those are important to track and confirm those, and make sure that the proposals, the programs, applications, scientific or technological applications, are actually producing the results that you need effectively and efficiently. That's part of it. The last one here is along with inevitable reactive solutions. That's always going to happen. You're going to have situations where you have to react to provide solutions, but there should be a conscious effort to adopt preventive methods. And so root cause analysis done for results. for effectiveness, not for compliance. And so those are some suggestions. Anyone, any position can recommend some of these suggestions or points that I've raised in these recommendations in conversations, in interactions, even in business contract arrangements between consultants and companies. Some of these points can come up for discussion to improve things. Our action is required, and this is now bringing us home to each of us that we have roles to play as individuals. We are consumers as well. We should at least do what we can to encourage and influence actions, not just mainly pointing accusatory fingers, but really coming with the idea of collaboration when the opportunities align themselves to encourage, to have conversations that encourage and influence positive actions that lead to eliminating gaps wherever they are in the food system and consumer protection measures. We may need to create the opportunities ourselves for that positive interaction and progressive contributions. And this is wherever we are, in our respective position and roles in the industry. So I encourage you with this to say, look, it's not just a matter of saying that things are not being done. It's now coming to the point of, okay, what am I doing? Type of direction and thought, because we have the knowledge, the capacity. I think you do, but I don't know about myself. But you have the knowledge, the capacity, the power, the authority, the opportunities sometimes to make some contributions for progress, and don't underestimate your ability to do that. So those are my thoughts here. Any final comments or questions?